So there's a big difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, particularly in his foreign policy. And yesterday I put out this video talking about what changed. I compared the 2025 national security strategy to 2022 under Biden. Today, what I'm doing is comparing the December 2017 strategy that's under Trump 1.0 and November 2025 strategy under Trump 2.0, and we're going to see some significant differences. So let's first start by looking at the summary of the 2025 national security strategy. And by the way, I went through this whole thing with the 2.0 national security strategy. I read the whole thing and highlighted. I showed you all that. So here I'm using some AI to help kind of clarify some things. Okay, the 2025 national security strategy is built around America First, a rejection of post-Cold War globalism, sharp prioritization of U.S. sovereignty, borders, economic, industrial power. It argues previous elites pursued unrealistic global dominance, hollowed out. Now that's kind of a MAGA thing. Like they're talking about the elites, the swamp, the global elite are trying to do these things. Okay, hollowed out America's industrial base and burdened the U.S. with foreign conflicts irrelevant to the core interests. Okay, so that's a change right there. Overarching themes are national interest narrowed to the essentials, and they made a big thing about it in the beginning. You have to have just small priorities, these little priorities. Now we can't do everything. Okay, the only issues that directly affect U.S. safety, prosperity, sovereignty are considered strategic. The NSS rejects broad values-driven or institution-driven foreign policy. Values-driven means like we're going to be realist about power plays and who's a big country that has power and they can do what they want, as opposed to, well, what's right or wrong. And institution driven, we're not going to be dealing with multilateral institutions so much as just what's in our interest. Sovereignty, borders, and migration are central. The strategy repeatedly asserts that border control is national security, declaring the era of mass migration is over. They're dealing with that internally within the United States with ICE. It frames migration as a threat vector equal to drugs, cartel, and espionage. Okay, economic power is the foundation of national power. This is one of the interesting changes here because economics has been very elevated in this document compared to the 2022 version under Biden or the 2017 under Trump 1.0. Reindustrialization, energy dominance, tariffs, reshoring, supply chains are treated as core strategic tools, not economic side issues. The document argues that economic independence and industrial capacity are prerequisites for military strength. Then peace through strength, that goes back to a common Reagan line, but not interventionism. That's different. So military superiority is required, but interventionism is rejected. Whatever you want to do in your country over their authoritarian government, that's none of our business to really tell you what to do, is kind of the way this comes off. Non-interventionist predisposition, as opposed to think about a George Bush or George W. Bush exporting democracy to the world. It's a very sharp shift. Trump stated his ability to negotiate peace deals, 8 conflicts settled, although as I'm talking about that today, Thailand and Cambodia are actually fighting again. A burden shifting to allies, especially NATO and the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. will no longer act as Atlas carrying the world's security. NATO allies need to spend 5% of GDP on defense. Partners must take primary responsibility for their regions. Then there was the Trump corollary to the Donroe Doctrine. This is one of the strongest emphasis in the entire strategy. So what is the Trump corollary? So a succinct definition would be the Trump corollary to the Donroe Doctrine holds that the United States will actively resist. Okay, so first, the Donroe Doctrine is saying European powers, you stay out of our hemisphere, we'll stay out of yours, you stay out of ours, right? And this was early in the founding of the United States. We don't want France and Britain and Spain coming over and trying to rip apart the United States, trying to do whatever they want to do. Okay, so the Trump corollary to the Donroe Doctrine holds that the United States will actively resist Chinese and Russian economic, political, or military penetration into the Western Hemisphere, treating such influence as direct challenge to U.S. strategic primacy. Because a lot of this is shaped around regions. The U.S. is going to play in its Western Hemisphere, America's sandbox, and Russia, you play in Eurasia, and China, you play in Asia. Okay, fine. Everybody's happy. Well, that's a big shift from the way that we've seen things before. Now, here's from the White House government site. Trump corollary to the Donroe Doctrine that the American people, not foreign nations like Russia, China, whoever else, nor globalist institutions that are trying to tell us what to do, will always control their own destiny in our hemisphere. Again, the emphasis is in our hemisphere. Okay, so let's go back to this. Trump corollary to the Donroe Doctrine. This is one of the strongest emphasis in the entire strategy. 7, China as an economic, technological, and supply chain threat. So the focus not on military deterrence, but on economic restructuring and unfair trade practices, protect supply chains, counter Chinese overcapacity, reduce U.S. dependence on Chinese manufacturing, strengthen alliances and economic leverage. Number 6, Europe's civilizational decline and ending the Ukraine war. Now, in the 2022 document from Biden's era, Russia was identified as a clear and acute, the language is even acute, threat. That's not here anymore. The emphasis on Europe's is on demographic. It's really kind of denigrating to Europe. Emphasis on Europe's demographic decline, migration issues, censorship, regulatory burden, and weakening cultural confidence. And it's not kind to Europe in any way. Middle East, burdenship, which should be. I mean, Europe are traditionally more of our allies rather than some kind of enemies to talk down to. Middle East, burden shift, not transformation. The Middle East is no longer the center of U.S. strategy. And then finally, Africa, we're going to focus on investment rather than direct aid. So a shift from humanitarian aid toward resource development and investment. Okay, so that's a summary of the 2025 national security strategy from the Trump administration. Now, let's look at a summary of the 2017 national security strategy under Trump 1.0, because it's very different. Yes, he talked about America first, and there was a worldview of emphasizing sovereignty and economic revitalization and peace through strength. But it's really still very much somewhere between George W. Bush and Obama and Biden. It's kind of in that it's really different than what we see just now. First, strategic worldview, 2017, NSS argues that the world has entered a new era of great power competition, primarily with China and Russia. Russia's hardly mentioned, and if it is, it's only mentioned in, we need to end the war with Russia in 2025. Russia, who seek to erode U.S. influence, distort markets, expand military power, and undermine democracies. Then he talks about rogue regimes like North Korea or jihadist T groups that remain central threats. And they were, like ISIS was a legitimate threat early on in this. U.S. prior strategies were overly optimistic about integrating rivals into the international system. American security and prosperity were weakened by unfair trade practices under investment in defense, porous borders allowing rivals to exploit international institutions. Thus, the document frames itself as a return to clear-eyed realism. That realism is going to come back and in a huge way in 2025. Pillar 1, protect the American people, the homeland, and the American way of life. Okay, so key priorities are going to, again, be about secure borders and weapons of mass destruction threats and combating bio threats, defeating jihadists and disrupting transnational criminal organizations. The only one that really stuck around here is the transnational criminal organizations, as we're talking about with Venezuela right now. Pillar 2, promote American prosperity. Rejuvenate the domestic economy through deregulation, tax cuts, and workforce development. Demand fair and reciprocal trade. We're still talking about that, and we're talking about it in a much more robust way now. Lead in research, technology, and innovation, and achieve energy dominance. We're still kind of talking about that one. Pillar 3, preserve peace through strength. Rebuild and modernize the U.S. military, renew competitive advantage in military dominance across all domains, nuclear, missile, space. And remember, during the first Trump administration, he created Space Force, cyber operations, intelligence, defense industrial base. Compete for influence using all tools of national power, not just military power, all tools of national power. But we've kind of gutted those tools of national power in the current Trump administration. Okay. Pillar 7, advance America's influence. This is not something that you're seeing in the 2025 document. The pillar covers diplomacy, values, American values, and global engagement. We kind of shredded the American values part in 2025 and said, you know what? We're not really trying to export that anymore. The U.S. will engage internationally, but always from a basis of sovereign independence, and that's consistent, not globalism. Okay? Not globalism. Okay, and that's consistent. American diplomacy will be competitive, not passive. Again, we're in the 2017 document right now, and they're talking about diplomacy will be competitive, not passive. We'll promote a world of strong sovereign states. We'll pursue better outcomes in multilateral institutions. Multilateral institutions? No, we don't want to play with those anymore in the 2025 document. Leverage foreign assistance selectively. Champion American values, liberty, rule of law, democracy, while recognizing they cannot be imposed by force. Okay, so this last little clause is kind of a nod to what's going to happen in 2025, but we're not championing this in 2025 anymore. Like, that's not where we're going. Then we had regional priorities, and the big region in 2025 is going to be the Indo-Pacific. The main strategic competitor is China, and that's going to be amplified in 2022. Goals are free and open, fair trade, secure sea lanes. But in 2022, it's going to be like, hey, a war could kick off here in China very soon. Europe, the primary rival is Russia in the 2017 document. Goals are to strengthen NATO, counter Russian political and military aggression. Russia, but that's not going to be talked about in 2025. Middle East, counter Iran, defeat jihadists. South and Central Asia, Afghan strategy, and counter T, right? Western Hemisphere, counter malign external influence like China and Russia. Again, not there anymore. Africa, focus on counter T and economic partnerships. You're getting a flavor for what's changed here. Okay, so then I scrolled down. I said, give me a clear comparison between these, and I went through all these. And then when we get to the end, what's new in 2025? That's what we want to look at. What's really new in 2025 that wasn't there before? Well, there's a sweeping ideological critique of American foreign policy establishment. Like, it's very different than what was before. U.S. strategy, they say, went astray after the Cold War. Elites mismanaged foreign policy. Globalism hollowed out the middle class. Interventions were misguided. International institutions eroded sovereignty. We don't want to play anything international anymore. So we're taking our ball and going home. And basically, that's it. They talked a lot about regions and talked about a lot about our hemisphere. Okay, then there's a predisposition to non-intervention as a declared principle, non-interventionism. So what we're talking about here is we're going to respect the separate and equal station of nations. We're not going to condemn them for whatever they're doing in their nation. Leave them alone. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. Okay, but that's talking to authoritarian regimes, and that's not going to work out well. Like, we're saying this is equivalent. Okay, immigration is framed as an existential civilizational security issue. It was there before, but now it's heightened. A new cultural competence meritocracy doctrine. This is new because woke and DEI and that sort of thing wasn't really a thing back in 2020 or 2017. It really rose up shortly thereafter and into the Biden administration, where DEI was a big thing and it was embedded into everything like the military was doing. That was a Biden administration thing that the Trump administration is unwinding. And then explicit economic nationalism. This is big as the engine of national strength. So there's a real strong emphasis on reindustrialization and tariffs and balanced trade and like really focusing on economics like was not there before. That's a new innovation. And then Golden Dome missile defense concept is something that Trump dreamed up within the last couple of years, last year or so really. And so that's into it. And then a new framework for alliance, the Hague Commitment. This is something that Trump's been pushing people toward, the Europeans to 2% of NATO, and now it's to 5%. And so I got to give Trump credit. He's right about that. NATO should have been more prepared with more commitment to their military budgets over time. And this is actually a fairly good push given what the world is that we live in. Trump claimed peace deals as our central strategic tool and claims that he is the president of peace. He's made these 8 deals, Cambodia, Thailand, all the way down to ending the Gaza war. But Cambodia, Thailand just broke out, well, in the last couple of days as I'm speaking. And then the realignment through peace as a policy. This is kind of dangerous in my estimation. 2025 claims peace deals can expand U.S. influence and reduce the need for U.S. intervention and create new alignment opportunities. This is the one that I'm worried about, is that we're trying to perhaps make deals just to end wars, just so we can have the new opportunities. Whether the wars are ended fairly or not is kind of immaterial. Now, the real danger here is this. There is a shift, a huge shift, the rejection of global domination as a U.S. aim. That is, 2025 explicitly states U.S. must reject global hegemony as a goal and must prevent others from achieving regional hegemony. Now, this hegemony word is something that the Russians tend to use a lot, talking about the United States. And U.S. doesn't tend to talk about that very often, but yeah, global hegemony. Okay, so if the U.S. withdraws and creates a vacuum in leadership, what's going to take its place? And so I get it. You don't want the U.S. to be the world's policeman, but if you don't want that, then do you want China to fill that gap? Do you want Russia to fill that gap? Because those are the leading contenders. So, okay, this is a big shift. I mean, a huge shift, as opposed to, it was a much more status quo in 2017. And a new emphasis on strong traditional families. Okay, that's there. Strong families, workforce participation, patriotism, cultural unity, spiritual and moral strength. Again, I think much of this is a reaction to the last 7 or so years of, as woke arose and DEI and a kind of disdain for the United States. It's just an allergic reaction to that. Okay, what's missing? Well, T is dramatically de-emphasized, but it could be de-emphasized because it's not like it's not as predominant as it was before. No 4-pillar structure about protecting the homeland and promoting prosperity and preserving peace through strength and advancing American influence. And this American influence thing, we're not trying to advance it anymore. We're just trying to be in our own hemisphere. Far less emphasis on cyber and critical infrastructure, no detailed weapons of mass destruction proliferation strategy, no explicit energy dominance doctrine, no detailed discussion of space power or intelligence modernization or public health preparedness or all these other things that were in the previous document in 2017. Humanitarian assistance and global development goals disappear. No emphasis on pandemics or global health security. Ironically, they were talking about pandemics before the 2020 pandemic. This was in 2017, and they were talking about like, yeah, we got to be prepared for what could be coming down the pike. And then we had 2020. No emphasis on space as a competitive domain. Okay, so a summary of the differences. What's new in 2025 and what's missing in 2025? Let's just look at this and we'll go over this last little bit. Ideological, okay, new in 2025, ideological critique of U.S. foreign policy that has gone off the rails in essence, and we have to readjust it and just play in our hemisphere. Non-interventionism as a principle, that's new. Immigration as an external existential threat, cultural merit-based domestic renewal, reindustrialization, think tariffs and that sort of thing, Golden Dome, NATO at 5%, broad peace deal narrative, rejection of global hegemony. That is, again, that's a new thing. Like we don't want to really be that, powerful, and spiritual, cultural, civilizational framing. What's missing, again, terrorism, T as a major pillar, detailed cyber defense strategy, weapons of mass destruction, energy dominance, space travel, all these other things are there. But really, the key changes are here. We don't want to be playing as a larger role in the world. We just want to focus on the Western Hemisphere in 2025. That's the big shift. It's to the point where we saw this in the New York Post back in January, where Trump was talking about Greenland and Canada and the Gulf of America and things like that. And the New York Post even labeled this the Donroe Doctrine, because it is basically a revisit to the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, that's the difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. Tell me what you thought about what you saw here in the comments below. How did I do? Did I answer your questions? Did it help you understand what's coming down the pipe? Because this is very different than what came before. All right, my friends, thank you for your time. By the way, if you're not familiar with me, I do videos about what's going on in the war between Ukraine and Russia every day. Please feel free to join me. Click subscribe so that you can be updated on that. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person who cares about the world that we live in.